Welcome to Leadership Reimagined, where game-changing conversations are reshaping the world of work. I'm Janice Ellig, the CEO and founder of Ellig Group, Executive Search Advisors, where we are reimagining search through our long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm delighted to welcome Dan Springer, the CEO and director of DocuSign, who is with me today. Dan has nearly 30 years of executive leadership experience driving innovation and hypergrowth across the software as a service industry. And prior to joining DocuSign in 2017, Dan spent 10 years at Responsys, and he was chairman and CEO there, leading that company. Dan began his career with McKinsey & Company and serves currently on the boards of DocuSign and UiPath, having been on multiple boards prior. Dan, I'm delighted that you could join us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Janice.
Well, today's program is entitled Leading with Humility and Humor, and I got a glimpse into your leadership style when you were featured CEO speaker at the November 9th, 2021 Breakfast of Corporate Champions. The biennial event, as you know, where the Women's Forum honors companies who have achieved gender equality on their boards. And you spoke very openly about how your mindset about gender parity changed, having been at one of these events prior with Maggie Wilderotter, an honorary co-chair of the Breakfast of Corporate Champions. Can you tell us about the experience that you had and where you are today with regard to looking at gender parity on boards?
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, the event you referring to, which was, I think it was 2017.
Correct.
I went into it with a very open mind. And I think, we're all on a journey, as you heard me talk about in the past, Janice, and I'm constantly, evolving my perspective. I'm thinking about, board leadership and specifically to the issue of the diversity of thought we want to have. But it was actually Ken Frazier who had sort of a seminal moment for me when we were talking about this concept of the excuses that people have for why they don't drive more diversity. And at one point he made this statement, which he told me afterwards, gotten to know each other a little bit after that session, that it was something he'd been preaching for a while, which he goes, why is it that someone needs to make the case for diversity? Who is sort of deigned the fact that homogeneity is the right answer? And I sort of started thinking about it more and more. And I said, yeah, we're thinking about this wrong. And we should be thinking about it much more broadly and thinking about all the different voices and perspectives we want, as opposed to assuming there was some risk to diversifying our boards. And that was a catalyst for me to think more aggressively about how I would remake the DocuSign board and senior management team.
And you have described DocuSign as a crisis in a lack of diversity and handling that crisis as a business problem with your leaders. So what did you do at DocuSign in terms of diversity, and where are you now 2 years, 3 years later?
Well, yeah, I think I looked at the situation there, and when I joined, there was a 12-person board, which was a large, and we were still a private company. But it was, I like to say, Mary Meeker and 11, white dudes. And so it was a situation where I looked at it and it was pretty clear this wasn't the right mix. But I had an interesting opportunity as we were going to prepare to go public. I knew that would be a natural way to drive some change on the board. There's only 2 folks left on the board from that time. And it wasn't like there was some dramatic fix a problem. It was just think about a thoughtful transition. And so as I've made the transition, I've dramatically added women and people of color to the board. We now have 9 members, and of the outside 8 directors plus myself, 3 are women and 3 are people of color. I don't think that's sort of a finish line. I think it's nice progress. But I've also added other white men onto the board in that time as well. It's not that it was sort of absolute, we can only add diversity, but the key was to say we're going to add the best candidates we really can, but we're going to ensure we have a diverse slate. And I think in the past, as the DocuSign board had been built, there hadn't been an effort to have candidates, either people of color or women, into that mix. And you mentioned Maggie earlier. Maggie has been a real partner to me. I invited her onto the board, and then a year later asked her to be board chair and help along with Pete Solvik, who leads our Nom and Gov committee to say, let's make sure we make this a priority, but within the mix that we're always going to find the best talent that we can for the board, which I think is really important for everyone to see and know that it's not just a diversity effort. Diversity is one of the most important components we needed to add, but it was also other talent we needed to bring in, regardless of their sort of gender or race, to have the talent we need to lead the company going forward.
Well, I think you're a leader in this industry, in your sector, the technology sector, in terms of the diversity and having a female chair of the board. So congratulations on that. And it does take, diversity of all types, doesn't it, to really reflect your constituents, your employees, your consumers, your investors, and your community. So you're doing that. But so much is rapidly changing, and the innovation that's happening in the software sector. What was the beginning like for you, and how has that changed over time and the challenges you faced along the way? Could you give us some insights into your sector and what you faced?
Yeah, it's interesting when people talk about innovation. I have sort of two high-level thoughts and perspective. One is that it always strikes me that there's this phenomenon that we look at new technologies and we look at new opportunities for innovation. And I think in the short run, we sometimes overhype them. We say, everything's going to change tomorrow. And then, of course, it doesn't. But at the same time, I think on the long-ranging standpoint, I think we underestimate the dramatic nature of that change. And whether that's a consumer thing like the iPhone, and when the iPhone came out, I think everyone said, the world's going to change. And 2 or 3 years later, there weren't that many apps yet. And it wasn't really changing. It was just a heavier phone, in a lot of ways, with poor internet service. But then you think about it, when you get to 10 years later and you say, oh my gosh, smartphones have fundamentally changed the way we do so many things. And in the software space, I think it's the same thing. You mentioned we're a SaaS business here. And I think early on, people got all excited about the cloud. But people didn't really change dramatically. Corporations didn't move all of their information onto the cloud because they had concerns about security and reliability. And you look out there today, and it just seems like there really aren't software companies anymore that are in the traditional mode. They just don't almost exist in terms of new businesses. And those that still have sort of on-prem historical businesses, almost all of those companies are in a transition to the cloud. So I think you have to have that patience. You have to spot the trends that really matter and then have the confidence to say, I'm not going to get sort of vindication on this new trend overnight. But if I'm putting my focus on those right bets and those right trends, I will definitely be rewarded over time.
I don't know what we would do without DocuSign today. I get this. Oh yeah, I get this all the time. The document, to sign, I just sign it on. It's wonderful. But so now, leading this company in hopefully a post-pandemic era, what things are you going to solutions, approaches, are you going to carry forward at the company? In terms of what you did during the pandemic, what you're going to carry forward, what might be different? Yeah,
I think there's a couple ways I think about that. One is sort of at a specificity level. I mean, we went almost, in 2 months, it's going to be 2 years, which is just crazy, to think how long we've been in this pandemic. And unfortunately, to your point, I think in the next 2 months, we're still in it. So I'm optimistic that this year will be a fantastic breakout year for us out of the pandemic, although I must admit I was a little bit more optimistic last year the same thing would happen. So I'm hoping we'll be right this time. But I think some of the things that we learned is we sent all the DocuSign employees home, March 2 years ago. And guess what? It kept working. And we never, I think, would have thought it would work as smoothly as it has over that period of time. So flexibility around sort of people having the opportunity to work from anywhere. And of course, our whole mission at DocuSign is to make it easier for companies to have the digital transformation that allows their, team to work from anywhere. So I think that's probably the biggest single piece. But there's another trend that I think might in some ways be even more important, but not as specific, which is the way we listen to our employees. And so as an example, I have town hall meetings next week, and I've been doing a survey on some big issues. And some is around things where people work and which jobs will require people to sometimes come into the office. And I think this experience has gotten me for sure, and I think many other leaders, to realize that there's certain things we just assume to be true. Even though sometimes our employees might be telling us that's not the case, but in our infinite wisdom, based on our experience, we say, no, we we know this to be true, and it makes us less flexible. And so I think that's probably one of the most important takeaways for me is I think I'm going to be a better listener. I don't think I was a poor listener before, but I think I'll be a better listener and more open to the insights around the innovative ways we can run our business and create sort of the employment brand where people can come here and do the work of their lives. So that's probably going to be even a bigger change that I think will last much longer.
You're raising such an interesting point because sometimes the solutions are right there on the front line and we don't listen or we don't communicate with those employees. And I've heard you on other podcasts say that with Zoom, you've been able to communicate with more people in a more direct way than ever before. So talk a little bit more about how that leadership what you're doing today is different from what you did prior for those 7,000 employees that are at DocuSign.
Well, it's interesting to your specific part of the first part of the question. It is amazing. We were, chatting before we started about the conversation I had with Eric Nordstrom the other day. And, as we tried to set up a quick call, it was very easy for us to carve out, 45 minutes and have a Zoom call. And if I'd been going up to Seattle or he'd been coming down here to San Francisco, one of us would have spent, at least a third of a day to make that happen. And so because it now feels comfortable to have those kind of conversations in an electronic format, that has unlocked the ability to see a lot more people a lot more efficiently. So I think that is, a fantastic innovation. In general, when I think about all of the team DocuSign, I think we've realized that there's a lot of interactions we have that we don't need to have in person, particularly some larger group gatherings. And we'll still have some, but we have a huge focus on ESG and our environmental impact. We're the company that says if you don't need to use paper, you don't need to cut down trees. So that's a huge focus of our DocuSign Impact initiative. And yet we realize that one of the biggest impacts we have that's negative is carbon from people flying around the world for internal meetings. And so we're dramatically revisiting that. And I'll give you one specific example where it's not always a trade-off that's worse. Sometimes you get a win-win. And we have a thing called Discovering DocuSign. We take our new employees each month and we fly them from all over the world to Seattle, where our company was founded. And we would have those people get a couple days sort of immersion. We'd have executives stop in and chat with them. And when it worked out, I live in San Francisco, but when it worked out, I could be in my hometown of Seattle and welcome those employees. The reality is it probably worked out about 2 out of 12 months. Now, every single month, I'm there virtually. So it's not the same as being there in person, but of course, they're not there in person either. Instead of flying those people and burning all that carbon to Seattle, they get access to a virtual session and they get the CEO every single time. And so those are sort of examples of, I now feel I'm doing a better job of welcoming those employees, teaching them about our values and teaching them about the DocuSign way, because we have that 12 times a year as opposed to the 2 out of 12. So those are the kinds of things I think we're trying to think about that we can be better as we go, and we call it back to better coming out of the pandemic.
Well, I can tell you from an executive recruiter standpoint, the more you can touch and feel and listen to employees, the more they feel they belong to the organization, not just feel included, but belong to it, right? That sense of belonging. So that's wonderful because I think they'll be with you and much more loyal, and you'll hear more about what some of the solutions are. I want to just take a moment as a quick reminder to our audience that you are listening to Leading with Humility and Humor with Dan Springer, CEO of DocuSign. The topics we cover like today's are all current, and a new topic with a new game changer is released on the third Thursday of every month. This is a great way to stay current on relevant issues happening around us. Now we're going to return to Dan and learn more about DocuSign and the shift that's happening in technology sectors. Dan, it does seem that it's more becoming a virtual focus, such as metaverse. What does this mean for DocuSign?
Janice, I think the innovation is going to be important for DocuSign, but really for everyone. And I think what we've seen, given that we've all really been about digital transformation at DocuSign for the last several years, that we see this as an opportunity as the world says we're going to be more comfortable doing things sort of business from anywhere. It allows people to leverage DocuSign technologies to make it easier for them to manage the agreements, and not just for the businesses, for the employees of those businesses and for their customers. So we think there's a real benefit from this. I also think it means we need to stay on top of the innovations. A specific example that relevant to DocuSign is blockchain and thinking about sort of W3 and how significant those technologies might be over time. And as we talked about earlier with some of these trends, it may be in the short run, they don't have a significant impact on our business. But I think in the long run, they're going to have very significant impacts on how our customers really run their businesses. So those are some of the trends that are happening. I think you're right that the virtual focus is going to really dramatically accelerate.
With the evolution of the agreement cloud, how is the strategic direction of DocuSign evolving, and what other product capabilities can we expect to see that you can talk about in 2022, 2023, 2024?
Yeah, so we're quite excited about the overall agreement cloud, vision. And I should mention, we talked about listening to our employees earlier. And I think one of the important things to have sort of humility, as a management team when you're leading a software company is to say, well, you have to have a vision for where you're going. You also need to listen to your customers. And so really 3 or 4 years back, we started talking to our customers about their e-signature business. And clearly e-signature is what brought DocuSign, to the dance. And it's a fantastic and very high ROI service. So we love e-signature. But what we heard our customers saying is that, before I am able to sign a document, I have to be generated, and then it needs to be routed around through a workflow. And then once I sign it, I need to manage those agreements. I need to have integrations with other software so it links together to build my overall business system and my sort of agreement cloud, as we like to call it. And then I need to store those agreements someplace, and I need to have intelligent search against those agreements to run my business better. And so that's really how we've thought about this overall piece. It's not just the signature. It's a generation of agreements before. It's the actions you take once you have those agreements, and then managing that repository, so to speak. And that's where you're really going to see us focused. So if I sort of describe our sort of innovation roadmap and what you should be looking forward to in 2022 is a lot of what we call Signature Plus. So that's things like notary, that's things like enhanced ID verification. But it's also things like CLM or contract lifecycle management. It gets into that way you manage that set of agreements in a repository and do advanced search against them to really run your business better. That's what I think people are going to see from DocuSign in the years ahead.
Great. So my investments are going to go up. I'm happy.
You and me both.
Okay. So great new ideas in the tech world coming out from many companies, including yours. But execution is always an issue, isn't it? And now we have a different playbook, and it can be daunting. So what is the advice that you have for others in your sector, particularly startups, how to make something successful given change is constant, execution, you're starting something, and then you've got to change again?
Yeah, I think the as you said, the innovation will be a constant. And I think when I sort of try to think about advice, and I'm always sensitive about giving people advice around their businesses because while I feel somewhat confident I've started to understand my own, I don't want to be presumptuous, right? They have the right answers. But there's certain principles that I think could make a lot of sense. And the first one is, especially for software companies, you have to realize that today it's about a customer success orientation. And particularly in the SaaS world where people are not sort of stuck with long-term embedded on-prem investments, they can easily change. And so we put a huge focus throughout our company in saying we all work in customer success. And when we measure our success as a business, it is about, are we really delivering success for our customers? That's probably the single most important thing that I would push on. And the second thing is, while there's an incredibly competitive opportunity that we are all facing with the customer opportunity, there's also the employment side. And there's an unbelievable war for talent in tech right now. And it's funny, the DocuSign view, sometimes I feel we're in the perfect space where we're not the absolute biggest, companies out there. So people are concerned with sort of having bureaucracy and you might see in a larger business isn't there, but you have all the stability of being a public company. So it's not the risk you might have seen from a startup. But other days I look at it and I go, we get it from both sides, right? So when we're in the employment battle for people and that war for talent, we're competing with the benefits that happen from the largest companies and those startups as well. So we realize that you have to figure out a way to make your employees feel that they love coming to work there. And one of the reasons we've had some very good success, and look at Glassdoor ratings, our internal surveys, is because we've done two things right. One, we've showed employees that we're really focused on investing in them, in their career development. And two, we've had a sense of purpose. And some of that purpose we talked about earlier when we talked about environmental impact. People realize that DocuSign makes the world and the environment better than if we weren't out doing what we do to drive digital transformation and move people away from paper and manual processes. At the same time, we have a huge investment in DocuSign Impact, which is where we do our philanthropic work. Primarily, our focus is about getting our employees physically working in the communities that have been so good to us. And that makes people feel excited about working at DocuSign. And then the last piece, and this is what's been sort of maybe most special to me in my tenure here, is when I go and meet somebody and they say, "What do you do?" And I say, "I work for DocuSign." Most people have the reaction you have, which is, "I love DocuSign." And we call them, they then usually tell us a story about how they signed on for a job or bought a home or some, momentous thing in their life that DocuSign made easier or enabled to happen that they wouldn't be able to do. And they tell us a story. We call those DocuLove stories. And it makes employees feel so good to know that not just our customers, but even the end users, sometimes that aren't even the ones that pay us, their lives are better because of the work we do. That's what helps us win that war for talent.
That's wonderful. And, I often remember Warren Buffett says, "I never invest in companies I don't understand." Everybody understands what you do. Right?
Well, understanding, though, Janice, I'll tell you, understanding can be good or bad. You referenced Responsys earlier, and Responsys was a fantastic company and a great run for me of 10 years. But when I used to meet people and I tried to explain Responsys and how it was a marketing software tool and it helped people do fantastic targeted, email marketing, a lot of people would listen to me and go, "Oh, so you're the spam people." And I would say, "I think you meant to say permission-based email marketing." And they said, no, I meant spam. And so, it's a lot nicer when you tell people what you do and they say, "I love your company."
I know. And people feel good. So let's talk a little bit about Responsys. You were chairman, CEO. You spent 10 years. It was a cloud-based B2C marketing software space. You led the sale of the company to Oracle in 2013 for $1.6 billion.
Yeah, $1.6 billion used to be I used to be proud of that. Today, I think that's a C round or a B round in Silicon Valley. But yes, at the time, that was a big win.
Well, nearly $2 billion, let's say. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but following the sale, you took a 4-year sabbatical to focus on your family. Tell us about why and what was that experience like? And then you returned 4 years later to become CEO of a fast-paced tech company, DocuSign. So tell us about that experience and why you did it.
Yeah. So for me, it was a very easy decision, and it was probably the best professional and definitely best personal decision I ever made. I had unfortunately recently become a single father with two boys, and I was in a situation where I was not doing a great job being the CEO of a public company and a full-time dad of two boys, sort of middle school age. But I realized this gave me actually a fantastic opportunity, and so post the sale, I took the opportunity to focus on one instead of trying to do both, and became, as I like to say, a stay-at-home dad. And I drove carpool and made breakfast every morning and did all those great things a parent can do if you have the time. And the closeness, I was always already very close. So I was a pretty hands-on dad already, but doing it full time, it was really special. And relationships that allowed me to sort of nurture with my sons. And I think feel like I was doing the right job of launching them to hopefully turn out to be fine young men. Was really a special time. I did not know that it would last that long. I didn't sort of make that plan. I just sort of said I was going to do this until I thought it was done. I ended up doing it to my younger boy, who had been an 8th grader at the time, till he was a senior and just about to graduate, and figured out where he wanted to go to college. And then I thought it was going to be time. Interestingly, I asked my son when the DocuSign opportunity came up, "Hey, what do you think if I were to get a job? I won't be around as much." And I can't tell if Robert said this because he really felt this way, or if because he was just trying to give me the flexibility to do what he thinks I wanted to do. He goes, "Dad, lately you've been crowding me a little bit. I wouldn't mind a little space. So you getting a job is probably not a bad thing." So that gave me the comfort that I could go off and take the job at DocuSign.
That's a wonderful, story, and thank you for sharing it. And probably then going back as the CEO of DocuSign probably changed you somewhat in terms of your view of family, values, issues, challenges of trying to, run your business and be a parent. So did that give you greater clarity? Because you do talk about your leadership and other leaders being in checking your ego at the door, and humility being a key attribute in leadership. So did that change you somewhat as you went in now to lead DocuSign?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think in multiple ways. A lot of times I used to have this observation when I was at McKinsey. People used to talk about certain people who were very hard charging and maybe didn't have all the EQ that other people might have. And then they had children. They had the gift of becoming a parent. And sometimes it really changed them, enabled them to see things differently. I know when I had children, it dramatically changed me because it gave me the opportunity to, love someone more than I love myself. And I think that was probably the single biggest step when I think about my own sort of maturity along the dimension you're asking about. But I'll tell you, when I, had had a situation where I was married to a stay-at-home mom, and that support, from a family standpoint, I probably took it for granted, but it was substantial in allowing me to focus on my career. When I tried doing both, I indicated already, I wasn't that great at doing both. In fact, I think, mediocre at best at each. So I had a lot more appreciation for the fact that some people are balancing so much more outside of the workplace than I was. And now when I look at people and I see sometimes people struggling and figuring out, how to make it all work, I definitely think I have an improved empathy. It's one of the reasons right after I joined DocuSign, we put in place a family leave program. And we now give 6 months, or we did starting then 4 years ago, 6 months off to new parents, whether they're adopting a child or having a birth. And that's whether it's a mother or a father, as long as they tell us they're going to be, focused on the child. We want them to have that bonding opportunity, but also that opportunity to say, let me take a little break from the work pressure so I can really focus on, being a great parent, getting that model worked out, and then come back to work, and ease back in, into a balanced environment. So I think that definitely is something that probably wouldn't have been on my radar. And, it's a little bit ironic because I grew up with a single mom, the greatest mom in the world, and who worked, all the time. And I should have probably had a higher appreciation for how challenging that was, for her to, raise me and my brother in that setting. Now I have all of that appreciation and empathy, but it's often wasted on the young, right? You don't have that experience and wisdom yet. So I think it was a pretty big impact for me. And then the last piece is, you asked about humility and how you think about that. I mean, I think for me, I learned a lot about the experience of, being focused on other people full time. And in the past, I've always sort of thought, well, I'm focused on our customers and our employees. But really crystallizing that sense is that my job is to make these two boys really, blossom to the best of their ability, and making it's just so not about you when you have your parent hat on full time. And to be fair, I joined several boards. It wasn't that I didn't do any work, but I just worked everything when they were at school. And being able to go to every, soccer game and lacrosse game, basketball game, and just really focus on that, focus not on myself, I think is allowed me to mature in a lot of ways.
And Dan, those are memories that they'll have forever, right? That you were there, and you'll have them as well. So we may sometimes not recognize things till later, but as long as we do, and then we, act on them as you have and with your sons. And I think humility is a great part of what we all have to have in life, right? And also not taking ourselves too seriously. It's all about, your leadership today going forward is going to make for a really great culture, continue to enhance the culture at DocuSign. Is there anything else you want to do in terms of your impact on society, on the company, personally, professionally?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I spent much of my life, I would say, ambitious. And I defined a lot of that ambition around sort of success in a very traditional, corporate way, sort of moving up a ladder, right, of some sort, so to speak. And I'm okay with that. I don't have any sort of regrets about it. If I could do it all over again, I would have a lot more wisdom probably for what I learned and how I influence people along the way. But I'm okay with that path. But as I am in a situation now and I look forward, maybe the biggest change from becoming a stay-at-home dad for a while is now the satisfaction that I get is very different. And the satisfaction I get professionally is watching the people around me, blossom. And when I see people at DocuSign and I look at their career trajectory and I look at the opportunities we've created and we'll continue to create for people to do more and take on more and push themselves to become better leaders, and better contributors to the company and drivers of our success for our customers. Like that is what amps me up. And I think that's probably what I will do. At some point I'll get, Silicon Valley will tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, old man, make way for the young folks." And I'll be okay with that when it happens. But at this point in time, it's a fun ride and I'm getting a lot of joy out of driving it. So I'm going to continue in this mode as long as they'll have me.
You will be the same as you were at 24 when you're 94. You will continue to be a driver of change, but really, I think relishing in watching others aspire to be the best they can be. And it's not always the level that one achieves, but really that personal as well as professional satisfaction, which it seems you have achieved, and now you're passing that on to others. So this has been such a wonderful discussion, but any other parting words for our audience?
Yeah, I'll give you one last thought, and it's related to the comment you just made around the 24 to 94. There's one big difference. And if there's one thing, I would have sort of changed, or I think people should try to, monitor in their own sort of leadership and participation in their company and really broadly in life. But I talk a lot about ego. We talked about this idea of managing your ego. And I think a lot about the impact people have in the company when they put the focus on the company's success versus their own. And I think it's probably the single biggest lever that we can control, right? Your certain amount of smarts you got the smarts you got. Yeah, you can get a little wiser over time, but you got what you got. How hard you can work, you can control that. But there's sort of limits, to how much you can work effectively and avoid burnout. When it comes to the ego, that's the piece we have a huge amount of control. And when I was 24 compared to where I am today, huge change. That's the one thing, if I could have changed, if I could have had the maturity and maybe even the self-assurance and self-confidence back then to say, I'm all about the organization's success and not so focused on my own, that would be the piece. And so the counsel I would give to people, that's your biggest control. And you may not see it, but if you want to be successful, you want to make your organization successful. And so to make the organization successful, find that way that you make your focus on that and not on you. It will come back in spades for your own success and your own development. But that's probably the single thing I would say is manage that ego to a point where you're saying all my activity and all my focus is on driving the success of the organization.
That's wonderful parting words. And it reminds me of that African proverb, which we all know. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yep.
And that's what you're saying. It's the company as a whole. Individually, it's good, but collectively, we are better together. So thank you for those words. And thank you for being on the program today. This was such an exciting discussion, and I look forward to hearing more about what you're doing at DocuSign.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Janice.
And thank you to our audience for tuning into this game-changing conversation on Leadership Reimagined with Dan Springer, CEO and board member of DocuSign. Leadership Reimagined is released on the third Thursday of each month, and you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit our website at elliggroup.com. Thank you all for joining us today.